So this tutorial is intended to teach you some of the basics of trigonometry. Alright, so trigonometry is not really essential for Physics 1 for the topics you're doing in this class unless you want to learn something a little more advanced. There's some things you can do with forces and some things we can do with motion that if you understand a little bit of trig, you can move on to some more advanced topics. So I think you'll find that it's really not too complicated. It's just a few things that you need to understand how to do. So trigonometry is all about the angles and sides of triangles. So let's draw a right triangle. Like that. Okay, so we've got our right angle down here in this corner. And let's talk about this angle over here. Usually we use Greek letters for angles. This is the Greek letter theta that we use a lot of times for angles in physics. And let's label these sides. I'm going to call this side side A, this side O, and this side H. And the reason we're picking those is going to become clear in just a little bit. So we have this triangle. H is the hypotenuse, and O and A are right here. And what trigonometry is all about is this. If I draw a second triangle, very similar to the first one, except I'm going to double the length of side A. So we're going to extend A out to there. Actually, let's make that red. Now A is going to go out to about there. Alright, so it's about twice as long. Now if I want to make side O, I come in here. Let me draw side O, which probably needs to go up to about there. And then side H is going to connect the two right along that line there. Okay, so side A is now, there's one side A, another side A, so it's about twice as long. So I'll call this A2. Okay, and side O also about twice as long. Right? So what this means is if I come back to this original triangle and I say O divided by A, because I've doubled the length of both sides, that's equal to O2 divided by A2. Okay, the proportions of these sides, even though the side lengths have changed, the proportions stay the same. And that's really what trig is. Trig is the realization that once you draw a right triangle, when you pick this angle, these two sides can be any length, but the ratio of them has to be equal to a certain number. No matter how big this triangle gets, you could extend it as far this way as you want. Whatever you decide to A, the same thing happens to side O. So really trigonometry isn't anything calculated. It's really just going to a table, or your calculator knows this table of values for the ratios of one side of a triangle divided by the other. So let's clear this away, and we'll go back to our original triangle there. Okay, let's see if it's still on the clipboard. There we go. Alright, so there's our original triangle. Go back to blue. And our angle theta was there. A, O, and H. Okay, now the reason we picked A, O, and H is because A stands for adjacent, which means next to. So A is the side that's next to the angle. O stands for opposite. So that's the side that's opposite the triangle, and H stands for hypotenuse. And that's what we call the long side of a right triangle. Okay, so trig is just knowing the ratios of O, A, and H, how those three sides are related. And the code words for those are sine, cosine, and tangent. Right? So sine of theta equals the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine of theta equals the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse, and the tangent of theta equals the opposite side divided by adjacent. Okay, so when you do these, you're going to need a calculator. And this is a calculator that looks pretty much like the ones we have in our classroom. And all you have to do is use these buttons across the middle, sine, cosine, and tangent, right there. Okay, so when you're doing these calculations, let's say that this angle happened to be 40 degrees. Okay, so you'd say, all right, the sine of 40, this is what it would look like when you put in your calculator, and then you press equals, and your calculator is going to tell you that the sine of 40 is equal to 0.64 something, and that's it. There's really no units on that. All right. Your calculator didn't calculate anything when it did that. All it did was went to a table that's stored inside and said, if this side is 40 degrees, that means O divided by H must be 0.64. It doesn't know what O is. It doesn't know what H is. It just knows that O divided by H is going to be equal to that number. And that's really all there is. You can do the cosine of 40. It's going to be A divided by H, and the tangent is going to be O divided by A. Okay? So the power of trig really comes in when you can take advantage of knowing these ratios to find unknown sides. So let's say that I had a triangle, and the angle in here was 35 degrees, and I knew that this side had a length of 17, and I want to know how long is that side. I don't know how long it is, but I know that there's a ratio that relates these two sides. So we say I want to know opposite. I know the adjacent side, so tangent is going to be the one that I'm going to choose, right? So we say the tangent of 35 degrees equals opposite, don't know that one, divided by adjacent. Let's put that up there actually. Tangent of 35 degrees equals opposite over adjacent. So that's going to be opposite divided by 17. So in your calculator, you put the tangent of 35, which it turns out is 0.7. So 0.7 equals opposite divided by 17. Multiply both sides by 17. Oops. 0.7 times 17 is 11.9. So that means the opposite side is equal to 11.9. Right? So now we know the length of that side of the triangle. Okay, say we want to know the hypotenuse. Well, now we know the adjacent side and the opposite side, so we can use either of these. All right, let's go ahead and use that opposite that we just calculated. So for this one, let's make a little space. So we know that this is 11.9. Calculated before. So we want to know h. So let's use sine. So the sine of 35 degrees equals opposite over hypotenuse. So the sine of 35 is 0.57 equals opposite divided by hypotenuse. Now we know the opposite is 11.9. Now the way I like to do this, I multiply both sides by h, so 0.57h equals 11.9. And so that means that h is going to be 11.9 divided by 0.57, and that works out to be 20.9. So that means that's the length of that side. Okay, so using trig, you can figure out the length of unknown sides of the triangle, because trig tells us that there's a proportion that locks those into a certain relationship, and once we know the angle on a side, we can figure out both of the other sides of that triangle. So that's a little introduction to trigonometry.